Good afternoon. Today is July 23rd, 2019, and I'd like to call this meeting to order for the tentative millage and budget meeting. The legal requirements is that Florida Statute 200.065(2) states that the School Board of Sarasota County, Florida will soon consider a budget for 2019-2020. A public hearing to make a decision on the budget and taxes will be held on July 30th, 2019 at 1980 Landings Boulevard, Sarasota, Florida. During such discussion, the governing body shall hear comments regarding the proposed millage rate. The general public shall be allowed to speak and to ask questions prior to adoption of any measures by the governing body. The governing body shall adopt its tentative or final millage rate prior to adopting its tentative or final budget. Would you all please stand and salute the flag with me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First up, we have presentation of the superintendent's tentative budget. Dr. Bowden.
Yes, ma'am. At this point in time, I'd like to turn the floor over to our Chief Financial Officer, Mitzi Corcoran.
Good afternoon, everyone. The purpose of today's meeting is to request your authorization to advertise both the proposed millage rates and the tentative budget for the 2019 school year, which is required, as Mrs. Goodwin said, by Florida Statute 200.065. First, I'd like to start off by apologizing profusely into the delay for your receiving your information. We did not get the final certification of our millage rates from DOE or the second calculation of the FEFP until 10 o'clock on Friday morning, which, as you know, we don't work on Fridays. But I have this great team in the budget office who all pulled together to get you all of your information, finish doing all of the budget documents, the advertisements, peer review, and get you electronic copies all within 4 or 5 hours. So I'm very proud of them for that. They did a great job. So much so that I actually had one of them camp out in the print shop Monday morning waiting for all of the documents so that we could get you your hard copy binders by Monday afternoon. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the items in the 1920 budget. Overall, the millage rates for school taxes are reducing from 7.003 mils to 6.943 mils. That reduction comes in the form of the required local effort tax. When you compare the 1920 tax revenues, though, to what's called the rollback rate, which is what would be the rate you would charge to generate the exact same dollar amount of money this year that you got last year, we are showing an increase of 1.87% on the required local effort and 2.64% in overall tax revenue. So on the revenue side, the general fund revenues are increasing by $9.4 million over last year. That is attributable to a $75 increase in the base student allocation, along with an estimated growth of about 497 students. It also includes, when it never has in the past, a $4.4 million Best and Brightest Scholarship. In the past, that was a state grant we would get later in the year. So that's included in your revenues because it's now part of the FEFP funding formula. And property values increased by 5.89%. So this is a little below what the state estimated when they prepared their budget. So it did modify the tax rates a little bit. But that change in property values will yield an additional $3 million in voter referendum, $2.2 million in the discretionary, and the increased property values will also contribute to $5.2 million in capital millage revenue. Transfers into the general fund from capital are also increasing by $6.5 million. This is because we're using the capital funds to offset the reduction in the digital classroom categorical that was reduced in the FEFP this year and the loss of the PICO funding for maintenance. In addition, we have increased costs related to the district's rekeying initiative, anticipated increases in property insurance and enterprise software licensing. There are no price increases included in meal prices for food and nutrition services, and we are anticipating a small increase in our federal entitlement grants, and overall the grants in the Special Revenue Fund, they increase throughout the year as we receive more grants. So on the appropriation side, the general fund is increasing. It's pretty much a status quo budget, but it is increasing from $465 to $484 million. So that is, salaries are increasing by the 0.5% pay adjustment that we're contractually obligated to provide for all staff, and they will all see that in their first paycheck. I'm finishing that up now. There's an addition of 5 positions in HR and the full implementation of our police department, which is 27 additional positions. And it also includes the best and brightest scholarships, which normally we amend the budget later on during the year for. Benefits are increasing due to an increase in workers' compensation, Florida retirement, and also our health insurance. Florida retirement's increasing between 2.5 and 3.6 depending upon your class, and health insurance is going up by 4%. So again, increased expenses related to the offset from the capital transfer for the rekeying, enterprise software, and property insurance. Charter school pass-through payments are increasing, additional revenue, more students, and a new charter school. So those expenses are going up. And finally, the capital fund, the budget reflects all of the projects that you approved at your last meeting in the CIP plan. And it also includes a $250 per student payment or contribution from the millage for the charter schools. So, so that's pretty much it on the funds. I did kind of want to give you a quick update on our self-insurance program. It's my understanding at your next workshop, you're going to kind of go through the entire program. But from a budgetary standpoint, workers' compensation is being restored to 75% of its previous rate. We're going to still monitor that fund's performance. I have some concerns. Mr. Robinson has contacted me with his concerns. But I want to wait until the actuarial report comes in, and then we can see how the fund has performed through the end of the year to see whether or not we need to go to the full 1% or restore back to the full 1%. And then, as I mentioned before, we have a 4% increase in our health insurance premium. So as you will recall, we didn't increase insurance last year at all. And I did want to say I'm very proud of the fact that since we've become self-insured in January of 2016, so 4 years, our total increase has been 9.86%. That includes the 4% we're including for next year, which is, so there are some people who have to increase that much in a year, so I'm very happy with that. And we have included in that budget the repayment back to the capital fund of that money we needed to fund the initial, was called the 11208, the 60-day liability that was required for self-insurance funds. It's included in there. We won't pay it until the end because I don't want us to have any kind of incremental increase as a result of that repayment in that self-insurance fund. But that's pretty much it for the budget. If you guys have any questions or anything, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Yes, we do. Mrs. Sigler.
Well, first, thank you. And I know you work Fridays, so you're not fooling anyone. And thank you, Krista, and to the whole team. I know that all of the counties were waiting for some last-minute information, and I really appreciate your hustle. These are big books for us to go through, and I know there was some last-minute information. I know, so two things, and one's going to be addressed to you, and then I'm actually going to ask you a question, just procedurally, I'll start there, and then I'll ask you a question about the workers' comp.
Sure.
There had been, just process-wise, there had been the statement that, and as far as the budget, the trim notice and the statute and the approval process, today is approval for advertising, but we are, in fact, approving a tentative budget.
Well, you're
putting it out there.
You are not approving the budget, but you are approving advertising a tentative budget.
Okay.
So those numbers are certainly going out there meaning in the advertisement to the community. And then when you come back next week, you're actually having a public hearing at which time people can comment on either millage rates and or the budget. And then you are formally adopting what you have tentatively advertised.
Perfect. Okay, sorry, just wanted to clear that up.
That's okay.
Finally, I know you mentioned the workers' compensation fund, and so overall our self-insured retentions, et cetera. So, and we are having a workshop that's addressing that in an upcoming meeting?
It was my understanding that Lynn Peterson was planning on having a workshop on their self-insurance fund. That was my understanding. I'm not positive.
Our next workshop is August 20th. We've not finalized that agenda, but it's our intent to have it on that.
Okay, because obviously the final adoption is in September.
Correct.
And I know you, and this is specifically to the workers' comp, that fund has been brought forward, and I believe as far as discussion on what those reserves look like, if it's 0.1 and then we went to point, I think it's just changed a lot. And so I want to make sure there's clarity on that. Also further understanding what our exposures are and making sure we're properly funding that. I know Mr. Robinson's brought that up in the past too, so.
Right, and so as far as the workers' compensation fund, the self-insurance fund, we have in the past, it's normally just a 1% rate that we charge, though it comes out of all of our other funds and funds the self-insurance fund. However, over time, when you don't see a lot of claims, you build up a large fund reserve, which we don't think is where we should have the money sitting in the fund reserve. So we will periodically adjust the rate downward so that that eats up some of the reserve, because all of the anticipated liability or claim exposure is sitting in a long-term liability account. So it's already been set aside. So it's not what you're seeing in that reserve amount. It's like above the line. Mr. Robinson knows it's a liability part of your reserve.
Right, I understand.
So there's more than enough cash in the fund to cover the proposed or anticipated expenditures in the fund. This is additional funds. So yes, I'd like to have a little bit more in there, so we're hoping it'll end up a little bit better, or we're hoping our exposure will go down a little bit, but irrespective, that's why we're monitoring it, waiting on where we end up for the year and what the actuarial report shows at the end of this fiscal year, from the end of the June 30th, 2019.
Okay, and then my question would be to Dr. Bowden, would be as it pertains to our whatever items would be inclusive on that workshop, if it would be, I know our previous conversation was more in general to the workers' comp claims that we had addressed here, but as it pertains to the reserves and any actuarial data that maybe beyond just workers' comp, but all of our self-insured retentions or et cetera, would that be addressed in this workshop?
If we have the reports, I don't think you'll have the reports by then.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Robinson.
For any of the insurance funds, are we deviating from the actuarial's recommendation?
No.
Comment, it is a little scary that, I mean, Mitzi and I talked about this at the Workman's Comp Fund. 3 years ago, it was $4 million, and now it's down to $750,000. I understand the concept of accrued liability. I understand the concept of above the line, obviously, but in the, it just gives me pause. So going to the health insurance,
mm-hmm.
So the $6.8 million that you have here, that's the payment of the loan. Will that be the final payment of the loan?
It's the full amount due to that fund.
It'll be the full amount?
Mm-hmm.
Are we required to pay interest to the other fund, or because
it's an
it's
interfund loan of completely non-obligated type dollars. They're not specific to be spent on a specific.
I just want to make sure that there's no state requirement, since we took it out of capital and kind of got a loan.
No,
that capital's. I mean, I'm sure. Just wanted to make sure that we're.
No, I agree.
Everything's. And then I remember a couple weeks ago, Ms. DeSantis and Richard Corcoran were in Tampa, and they announced emotional wellness initiative being required by all the school districts. Is that included in this budget?
We do want to anticipate that initiative will have any financial impact.
It won't have any financial.
That is correct.
Okay.
Mrs. Brown.
My question goes to the best and the brightest. Our state funds have gone down by $3 million. I think a lot of that is because our local taxes are now paying for the best and brightest, but they've also changed how they're going to distribute the best and the brightest.
Correct.
Now,
I just want to think. Let's see.
in previous years, they said this is how you do this, this, and this, and this year the SAT, ACT scores aren't there anymore.
Correct.
But just because you're highly effective doesn't mean you're going to get a highly effective bonus this year. Have you figured out yet how many of those people would be Or is this I see Todd getting a little excited here, or not anxious.
We had an in-depth conversation yesterday. The state has released 3 criteria. Quite honestly, I think their interpretation differs a bit from the actual text of the bill, but DOE has taken a very broad approach. I think they want to qualify as many schools as possible, and so DOE will actually qualify the schools and generate a list. Having said that, Denise Cantalupo is going to take a first blush at it based on our interpretation and the technical assistance that has been issued by DOE with a promise of much more to follow. But we do anticipate a high number of our schools will qualify under the expanded definition that DOE is working with.
And speaking of the definition that's in the law, I understand that there's a lawsuit out there now saying that DOE told us to deduct the taxes from the amount of bonuses because that's what they gave us. And I guess this lawsuit is saying, well, wait a minute, state, you should have paid those taxes. I would think they're saying the state should pay it, not the districts, or are you familiar with that?
I've heard about the lawsuit. I do know it's related to the withholding or reduction of their gross pay by the amount of the employer side of the payroll taxes, which is your Social Security and Medicare, so it's 7.65%. So if you got the $6,000 SAT, ACT bonus, it was reduced to $5,563.71 or whatever that number was for the amount of the payroll taxes that the district had to pay because we received $6,000 from the state.
Yeah, and I think the lawsuit is against the state, not the districts.
I believe so.
You know,
I'm not aware.
It is against the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something else that's hanging out there.
Well, and the last one was just settled. The other Best and Brightest.
There was another Best and Brightest about some
African American and Hispanic teachers.
Discrimination, that it discriminated against groups of people.
Right. So we're gathering that data to provide to DOE so that they can. There's a $15 million settlement.
Now, do the teachers have to have applied for that, or will it just get to them?
If they're highly effective and they fall within those classes, then we'll send that information to DOE. Anyone who's already received the $6,000 obviously won't get an additional one, but if you have not, you will or should be able to receive the other one.
Now, and the state will pay that, not us.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Robinson.
I'm sorry, I was remiss too. I just want to thank you and the budget lady, Krista, for everything you guys do. Because I'm sure at this time of year, you guys are probably working on next year's budget at the same time. So
then I just signed the engagement letter for the audit. So
yes,
I'm working in 3 years.
So I really do appreciate all the hard work you guys put into and the late hours. And like Bridget says, we know you guys, don't take off on Fridays. So really do appreciate it. So thank you guys for what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Mrs. Brown.
I have another question, and I would imagine we talked about increasing the I think was the level of the aides at Oak Park, and then also I believe the bus drivers, so that they would be getting more money. And also we were talking about, I think, about increasing the wages for minimum of $12 an hour. Is that in this budget? And if not, why not?
So it is not in this budget. It is a proposal that has been made in contract negotiations. And so we've really not gotten into the financial, but we have made that proposal. And so because that proposal has not been accepted and we've not put it into this budget.
Okay, so if there's any changes, that'll have to happen afterwards and be paid backwards. Okay.
Mrs. Zucker.
Do we have any idea why that proposal has not been accepted so that we could include it into our budget?
At this point in time, I would say negotiations have been rather one-sided. We've made a number of proposals. We anticipate when we go back in August that the union will make proposals and then negotiation will begin in earnest. But we are really kind of in our infancy in regards to contract negotiations.
So I think all three of those proposals are, I think the employees would be very excited with those three proposals. So I can't see why it doesn't move forward. Anyway, I just want to thank you, Missy, as usual. I know you were really stressed and this was late. I came and picked it up yesterday myself, but I thank you guys because I know it's been really rough this year. And the decisions that you have to make with half of the information is really tough because you don't want to make a wrong decision. So thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. Bowden.
Yes, I just wanted to provide some perspective in regards to the proposed millage rates that you're being asked to advertise today. As Ms. Corcoran correctly stated, the millage rate from 2018-19 to 2019, the total millage rate is decreasing. This is the sixth consecutive year that the millage rate has decreased. If you were to go back to the 2002-2003 school year, and the reason I anchor my comments in that year is that is the year that the referendum passed and those taxes were first imposed. So essentially, voters went to the ballot box and authorized school taxes in the amount of 9.287 mills when the additional mill was included. I want to put that in perspective. If you take the 2002-2003 millage of 9.287 and compare it to this year's of 6.943, you see a difference of 2.344 mills. A mill has a current value of $66.4 million. And so the impact on this year's budget is slightly north of $155 million in net reduction in millage rates. If you were to apply that increase or lack of increase of $155 million across the 5,671 employees of this district, it comes out to an astounding $27,445 per employee. And so I just wanted to put in context the millage rates and their decline and the impact that it's having on our budget and more directly our employees.
Mrs. Brown.
Back to our employees and also to somebody in our audience. You know, we were talking about, you know, some of the problems at Oak Park, and one of the problems was the turnover and the aides. So are we having, you know, also when bus drivers, I mean, how are we set to hire aides at this school and bus drivers, you know, this year, and if we haven't been able to offer them the higher salaries?
So I received a staffing update in regards to bus drivers. We currently have 17 vacancies for bus drivers. That number is less than it was this time last year, but is still very concerning. I will be receiving a staffing update at Oak Park. One of the things I've asked for is to disaggregate the data on substitutes. There's been some conversation about the amount of long-term substitutes at Oak Park. When we have a substitute para position, our first option is to fill that with a substitute para. That's very rare that we're able to fill those positions with a substitute para. So we authorize those positions to be filled by teacher substitutes. And so when you see the number of long-term subs at Oak Park, those are not always subbing for a certified teacher, but they are subbing for the para. And so we've asked for a month-by-month comparison of how many long-term subs were at Oak Park last year. We've asked that to be disaggregated for how many of those subs were serving in lieu of a teacher and how many were serving in lieu of a para. And then we do anticipate a staffing update, but I can tell you there are a number of vacancies at Oak Park for the para position. I'll be able to put a number on that for you tomorrow.
Okay, and will there be at our next workshop or sooner a discussion on some of the things you discussed at Oak Park?
Yes, I anticipate on August 20th that we'll spend a considerable amount of time talking both about Oak Park and Emma E. Booker Elementary School.
Thank you.
Mr. Robinson.
It's my understanding that we could tax ourselves extra millage up to 13 millage. 13 mills is the...
Yes, there's nothing that limits us when we go out to referendum to a single mill.
Right, and so we could go, if we thought that we're being hamstrung because the millage isn't high enough, we could go out next November for additional millage, if the board so choose. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that's clear, because sometimes people, looking at the places, and since it's coming from our citizens could opt to go for additional millage. And speaking of Oak Park, you had emailed me and told me that you were meeting with the teachers and parents on July 18th. I emailed you and asked you how that meeting went. So now I'm going to ask you now, how did that meeting go?
Sure. So my meeting was with the principal. I happened to arrive, and there was a group of parents and teachers that wanted to speak with me, so we spent some time with them. We have another meeting scheduled for tomorrow. That meeting was rather one-sided in that I requested a great deal of information from the administrative staff, and so they will be returning to me tomorrow with answers to a lot of my questions.
And parents will be involved in these ongoing discussions?
Correct. One of the things we're working on is a communications plan in regards to reaching out for feedback from both parents and the faculty at Oak Park.
Two-way communication, good.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Ziegler.
Thank you. Thank you for referencing the various information you'll be providing us as it pertains to long-term subs. I know that's been a long-term request by members of the board, but also members of the community. And I know we talked about it as far as breaking it down so we have a real, actual look, and it's not just the numbers are meaningful and it's not aggregated in an annual level, but also to the point of what you explained. It's sometimes it's filling in paras and not just instructional. The other thing I was going to ask, and I know we had received an email on it today. I don't know if it was today. I think it was recently. As far as of those who's in CLI training.
Correct.
And can we provide that information as well? As
Certainly,
far as,
yes.
To include that into the conversation. Okay, thank you.
Well, I'd like to get back to why we're here today, which is the proposed advertising of the millage rate in our tentative budget. And I want to thank you, Mrs. Corcoran, our wonderful CFO, and your brilliant staff for all your hard work, because I know that you're here many, many nights, too many nights, and a lot of weekends. So that doesn't go unnoticed, and we certainly thank you very much for all of your hard work. I will just mention one thing, or a couple of things. One is that when you see the advertisement in the paper, it's a great thing to cut out and keep. I have a bulletin board that I keep it on, because throughout the year, those are the important things that we can refer to for help or assistance if we have questions. I go away this October for a brush up in finance. I went for another finance course last spring, and I'm going again this fall to Holly in the Hills, and I'm looking forward to that. But one of the questions that I was asked when I had some homework to do for the last one was to bring that ad in, and so I've started, kind of having it available to me at all times, and I would encourage all of us to look it up in the paper and to print it out. But looking at our certification of school taxable values that we have this year and comparing it to just 3 years ago, it was worth the current year taxable value of real property for operating purposes for school taxable value was $53.2 billion. This year, 3 years later, it's 64.5. So it's really grown. I mean, our community has really grown. Every community in the state of Florida does not have this kind of growth. So it's understandable as to why we note that we have lost as much money as we have in our required local effort with the rollback. And, that's probably been the biggest concern that I've had about our last few years. So I want to thank you again for all that you've done, and keep up the good work, because now you've got 2 sets of books open and you have to recalculate last year, this year, and get everything closed up in September. So thank you again for all your hard work. We appreciate it. Mrs. Ziegler.
Sorry. But Mrs. Goodwin had said something and actually maybe reminded me of something. You had sent us an email, and I think it's now per statute, we have to approve the travel expenditures for individuals, individual school board members.
500.
And I know you'd asked us for it. Is that included in here?
It'll be included, and I'm sorry, Mr. Robinson, I meant to send it to you, and right as I was getting ready to leave, I'm like, dang it, I forgot to send it to him. So I will send, Kathy prepared a document for me, and we're going to include it in your July 30th agenda.
Okay.
As an action item for you to vote on.
So it's a separate item, it's not in the budget? It's not, I mean, obviously the funds are allocated, but it's separate, it's...
Correct. It'll be a separate item that will show each of the individual board members their anticipated travel, how much the total is that they plan to spend, and you will vote on that at your meeting.
Okay.
So that should take care of any of the travel that's at least included in that document for the course of the year for the board members.
Okay, so I just wanted clarification because there'd been discussion that it was just going to be, by way of the statute. If it was just in the budget, then we would have been compliant. And
it's in the budget, but you'll actually have an action item on your July 30th agenda for this particular.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
And I plan to do a lot of travel this year because of my being an officer for the state Florida School Board Association, and most of that travel is covered by the state. And I'll have a list for all of you as to what those travel arrangements are at the next meeting.
Okay.
Mrs. Zucker.
That's why for the last 5 years you really have very little expenses from me, because I've been paid, my bills have been paid by the Florida School Board Association.
Right.
So for 5 years. So when people say that they don't take money, I want you to know that mine was limited.
There you go.
Thank you.
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, and for the record, my travel expenses have been zero. My reimbursements have been zero. I don't think the school board has ever written a check out for travel or reimbursements or anything for me. In fact, I've written checks out to you, and you've made it quite clear that
the merrier.
You don't take cash, you only take checks. So.
Correct. No cash.
Any other comments? Then let's move on to the hearing of citizens. I have 2 cards. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak. When the timer flashes yellow, 1 minute remains, and you need to begin to summarize. You must stop speaking immediately when the buzzer rings. Please note that respect for divergent viewpoints and civility will be shown at all board meetings. First up is Stefan Wise. I got your name right today. I didn't start it with an N.
Other than Ms. Ziegler, who wasn't here last week, maybe she's over me. I look to the left of Mr. Robinson, and I find it unbelievable that you can sit up here and said you held meetings at Oak Park on a problem that's existed since August of last year. My son is Liam Weiss, and his teacher was assaulted in a cafeteria, bloodied, out of school for 8 months, lost 86% of his hearing. There's been over 5,000 incidents at that school as of May 1st, and you're acting like you're just now hearing about these problems for 2 years. When you recommended that principal 2 years ago this week, we should be lucky to have a caring and qualified individual lead our school. Well, see, a spark starts a flame, which starts a fire. That school is on fire because you have done nothing. You've done nothing. You sat here and talked to these board members and passed it out and passed the buck along. We didn't know, we didn't hear. You had a whole room full of parents in here last week, and you still haven't met with them. Here's the thing that kicks me. I spoke with you for 5 minutes over here. You took my phone number. You took my email. You couldn't be bothered to contact me, but you sit here and approach me while I'm sitting in here to talk to you again today and say, well, I spoke with a teacher and said your son wasn't even in the classroom or in the cafeteria. What do you expect me to say that? My son's teacher was in a classroom, watched the teacher get bloodied, has had problems for 6 months, and I told you all of last year he was in a classroom with a substitute teacher, and you want me to acknowledge that you've done something? Well, all these ladies to the left of Mr. Robinson agree with you. One of them wrote your contract and shoved it down the throats of the other 2. You approved a man in this Me Too movement now, but you gave him a contract and then you're going to investigate him, but you've got an attorney over there who's fully capable of giving you good advice. So now we're spending $20,000 to investigate your COO in a Me Too movement, which you've been accused too, and he should get his day in court. but not at the expense of you giving him a new contract with Ms. Zucker and then going 2 days later. You've got Ms. Brown and this other woman over here. You've allocated $250 million for 3 high schools in the last 10 years between Venice, Riverview, and Northport. What have you done for Oak Park? You're sitting here talking about you can't even pay the bus drivers there right now. You can't even get a full staff of teachers, but you've got over 5,000 incidents. You've got 35 incidents a day, and you don't even have the wherewithal to speak with this great sheriff that we've had in this town, so now you're having to put together a police force. Having served in the military for 8 years, that's not going to be an easy process. You could have segued that over 4 years, but now they said, no, you handle it now. That's on you. And all the people sitting to your left that agree with you, that is ridiculous. They should make Mr. Hardy the superintendent right now and step off all of you. One's been accused and paid a fine for campaign finance, had issues with that. The other 2 of you have accused parents and teachers of starting a fire, talking in the press and saying, oh, this is all funny how this comes up when contract negotiations come up for teachers. One of you made a quote about the parents. Oh, it's funny how we hear about all of this stuff now. Well, I never said Ms. Lowitz was the problem. She probably should have never been the principal there to begin with. I looked up all of the answers to my questions before I asked them of you. Her qualifications don't make her capable of running a school that's 50% autistic. You just shoved a bunch of kids into a room. Some of them, they're bigger than you and I both and can take out full-grown adults and put them with kids in wheelchairs. And now you're going to sit here and say, we're looking into it after 3 months. You've known for a year. This is ridiculous.
Thank you.
All 4 of you. You should have all stepped down.
Next up, Raina Bazzini.
Good afternoon. My name is Rana Bazzini. I'm a member of POPS, Protect Our Public Schools, but I'm not speaking for them today because we have not addressed this particular issue. It's a puzzlement how Oak Park has morphed from a school where people moved to Sarasota to attend it, and now it is facing problems that it boggles the mind, as this gentleman addressed. I refer you to some of the articles in the Sarasota Herald Tribune and at the last board meeting to one who is experiencing some of these problems. I've been an extremely strong supporter of public schools, but I'm not blind to the fact that they're facing multiple challenges which you as a board are very familiar with and have to deal with on a daily basis. The things that schools have been tasked to do since I attended school in the 1940s is overwhelming and may be a huge part of the problem that exists today. This is true especially regarding children with special needs. When I taught my first special education class in the 1960s, the now obsolete terms educable and trainable were used. The range of disability was much, much narrower then in today's students. Fast forward to today, when people who have never set foot in a classroom except possibly as a student think that they know how to run the schools. Think Tallahassee. I don't quarrel with their good intentions, but we all know where that road leads. Then we have the different pedagogical theories that are bouncing back and forth, and while they're being tested, the children are the guinea pigs. One of my favorite expressions, an engineer friend told me, his professor wrote on the blackboard, you all remember what a blackboard was, when the ship of theory sails on the sea of reality, it often sinks. I highly recommend that you read Carrie Seidman's article in today's Sarasota Herald Tribune. I think she hits the nail on the head as to what the situation is. It's what I hear from teachers, from parents, from administrators. Sometimes, a lot of times, they have to implement programs and policies which they disagree with and they know are unworkable. I say only partially in jest, perhaps a little civil disobedience is in order. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have item number 3, the acceptance of the proposed millage rates for advertising.
I would move that the following proposed millage rates for 2019 be accepted for advertising in accordance with the requirements of Chapter 200.065 of the Florida statute. General voting operating, 1 mil. General local required local effort, 3.695 mils. General local discretionary, 0.748 mils. Capital outlay, 1.5 mils, for a total of 6.943 mils.
Second. We're going to have a voice vote because Mrs. Ziegler's machine is not.
It's working.
Oh, it's working now? Okay, then we can.
Appears to be.
Okay, is there any discussion? Please vote.
I'm clicking on it. Shouldn't that little box come up? Oh, here it is.
Here we go.
Or cancel. Why is it cancel vote?
And the vote passes 5-0. Wonderful. Next up, we have item number 4, review and approval of the tentative budget for advertising. May I have a motion, please?
I move that the tentative budget for 2019-2020 be approved for advertising as displayed in the enclosures.
Second.
Mr. Robinson.
I will be voting against it, but I think I've enumerated those previously, and so I see no reason to belabor the point.
Thank you. Mrs. Ziegler.
I had asked the question earlier of the attorney just because procedurally I know that there was, oh no, it's for advertising, but if I take back what we do for policies, we hash them out and then put out the version that we overarching agree with. And so I too have shared concerns. As far as our spending, and I am concerned that we have not made the proper adjustments. I do want to be very clear that I recognize that Mitzi and your entire office, that's not something that I'm bestowing on you guys at all. I think it's a lot of the decisions could be made up here at the board level. So I recognize the challenge that you guys are faced with, but I will also be voting against this.
Please vote. And the vote passes 3-2. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Anybody with a comment? Mr. Robinson.
Yes, I have received a lot of calls from people asking me to request Ms. Zucker to resign. I am not going to do that, and I would wish people would stop calling me and asking me to do that. I think you should treat people the way you want to be treated, not the way people treat you. And so, so there's no reason for anybody to continuously call me or ask me to do that, because I'm not going to be doing that, because I think that's wrong.
Okay.
Mrs. Ziegler.
I know this is a budget hearing, but I wanted to take an opportunity to comment regarding a recent report that took place over the weekend pertaining to the contract renewal for one of our administrators, Jeff Maltzby. I want to be very clear that any of my comments right now do not pertain to my opinion of any guilt. This is merely process. I recognize that there's an ongoing investigation, so again, I'm speaking specifically to process. It was confirmed in the report that, based on a timeline, that a complaint had been brought forward to a board member and also the superintendent prior to the renewal, before the action for the board was to approve the renewal of that contract. While I recognize there's no policy that dictates whether or not board members should be aware of that, I would hope that where moral ethics and integrity of the institution would guide when we are absent a policy. Given the fact that our job is to take action on items, we can only do that with being informed. Just as we require, when we hire someone and I'll reference the issue that took place in Manatee County with Mr. Hunley and Mr. Peterson. We required that information to make an educated decision about how to move forward. And it's not opining guilt. I believe in due process, and we have an ongoing investigation. Again, I want to make sure that's very clear. But as far as what's required of us in order to make informed decisions, I think that it could have either been postponed, or we could have been made aware of what had happened given the serious nature of the allegations. I was very disappointed to also hear that other board members, at least in their quotes, had stated that we don't have a policy that directs what we need to be, whether or not we should be aware, whether or not someone's under investigation, and whether we should have the right to approve them. Again, I believe that judgment could have been made better. At the end of the day, I have heard from so many people in this community that are outraged. And I will tell you that I share in that outrage overall from what has been at least reported. And again, I understand that there is an ongoing investigation, and I look forward to reading the outcome of it, but I will not stand silent or sweep things under the rug when these things have been reported and people who are involved had confirmed that took place. So again, this message is to the community that I share in the very frustration and the concern, and that I can't speak in any more detail given the ongoing investigation, but at that conclusion, I do look forward to addressing these issues.
Dr. Bowden.
Well, essentially, you've come to a conclusion that there's wrongdoing, and I think that's extremely inappropriate until the report is released. And so I think once the report is released, I'd be more than happy to walk you through a timeline. But for you to assume that I had information that would have impacted your decision to renew or not renew that contract at the time it went through you is an assumption that will not be supported by fact.
Mrs. Zucker.
It's really something when you do the right thing and you get slammed all over the place for it. I'm the person that reported the incident, the harassment incident. I'm the one that brought it forward so that it could be addressed. And now I'm being called a liar, and I'm being vilified because I stepped forward and helped one of our employees. I'm also working with Oak Park's parents right now, and I'm trying to set up a meeting with them. So be careful what you say, because you don't know everything that happens, because I don't sit up here and tell you what I'm doing, which might be a fault of mine, but it's the way I am. Part of it.
Take him out.
Part of it.
Take him out. Ask him to leave. Ask him to leave, please. Ask him to leave.
No.
Go.
So, in conclusion, I'm glad I stepped forward. It's okay if I'm attacked, because sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And besides which, as I tell you all, I'm from Brooklyn. We can take it.
Mrs. Brown.
I guess mine was to that gentleman, too, when he talked about, and I think we probably ought to limit personal attacks during.
I think we really should.
Because talked about people who cared or didn't care about Oak Park. There were, 3 people that were at the graduation, and those are the 3 people that are being people who didn't care about Oak Park, and that show up, and and I'm not one to lay out everything that we do. But in regards to the comments by Ms. Ziegler, one of the things that my understanding is why we went to a special investigator is to look at when it was known, what was known, and what was done. Those are the kinds of things, and it was procedure followed. And, I'm anxious to see that. I'm anxious to look at that. But I know that we have people, in several areas of our district that have been arrested and they're out of the classroom and they're someplace until, something is resolved or there's investigations, and they're, I think we need to look at it procedurally, and that's what I said. I wasn't talking about this case because I don't think we should talk about this case, but I think we should look at, because right now we're said, well, what we need to do is, in case, they're found to be innocent or the charges against them. I'm not talking about Jeff Maltzby. I'm talking about other employees that we have. We hold off and we keep them employed and, maybe shredding papers or whatever. But I think what we need to do is look at that, because the worst that could happen is we're wrong and we could go back and pay them. I think we need to look at that policy or procedure or whatever that is and make a decision, not based on one person, one instant, but based on all of the instances that would come before us. And perhaps that this one might bring it to a head, but I do believe it is something that we should look at, but not refer it to one instance. I think it's a general issue that we need to be looking at across the board. And I, too, am looking forward to that investigation to find out who, what, when, and where.
Mrs. Ziegler.
I want to be clear, again, the item that I was addressing was specifically about the timeline that Dr. Bowden and even Mrs. Zucker, per the Herald Tribune and statements that you guys made, confirmed. I'm not saying what exactly was known and to what depth, and that's why I'm not trying to get into that. Okay. I'm just saying merely that was confirmed, and then afterwards we were unaware, and to me, I think that puts us at a disadvantage to work together as a board to make the best decisions. That's all I'm saying. So
Dr. Bowden.
So do you want me to answer it?
My comment is not particular to this part of the discussion, so if there's other items related to this, it's just a comment before we adjourn.
Mr. Robinson.
Ms. Brown, as somebody who's been the subject of many personal attacks up here, I hope that is a new day and we stop that going forward, because my daughter's been attacked, my wife has been attacked, I've been attacked. So hopefully the constant attacking can stop, because it happens more than just with somebody open to the public. But I also think that, for example, I'll use myself as an example. Today I asked Ms. Corcoran some questions, and Ms. Corcoran answered all my questions. And if I end up not sharing the information with the board, that's my decision and that's on me, and that's my responsibility to come back to the board. If I think that I got information that could impact other people's votes, then I need to take responsibility about whether I share that information or not share that information with the full board. Likewise, if a board member says that she had information, she came forward, and all the board members weren't made aware of it, because I certainly wasn't made aware of it, then that, you have to take responsibility for your actions. You make those decisions about what you want to share and what you think is going to affect the outcome of the vote, and you need to take responsibility for that action and not try to pass it off on somebody else, especially when you say, I read all the personnel reports.
Oh, shit.
Mrs. Brown.
We had quite a long discussion when we were talking about our sexual harassment policy. Sorry. We had quite a long discussion in our workshop about the sexual harassment policy and about the person coming forward, and we had to take into account how that person felt about it. Did that person want to make a formal complaint, and did that person want to make it, and that we had to be careful. I don't know. I do not know the timeline of this, but when we talked about sexual harassment, we made it clear that a lot of this was on the part of the claimant. I mean, because we did not want to put them through something they might not have wanted to go through. So if they didn't want to do that, then we did this. And we don't know. We do not know what was said those days and what happened. And and I know it's a matter of days before what one person said, and what another, and we have to wait for this investigation, and we cannot be making up our minds either on how it was treated, because that is part of the investigation. Part of the investigation was the procedure followed. And part of our procedures is to have an understanding of the person bringing a complaint forward and not making it and using it for other reasons, because it's delicate situation, and we can't take it upon ourselves to decide when a complaint is going to go public. We can't override what someone brings to us and say, if I don't know what happened here, but we can't say somebody should have brought this forward and brought it public. We don't know. We don't know what she said, and it was not up to us to make that decision to make it public. Part of it was what the person had to say at that time. We can't make that determination. Whether or not, I mean, that's all I'm going to say.
Well, this was a tentative budget and millage meeting, and I said to someone this morning, I don't know that it will go 10 minutes or 15 minutes, or it'll go longer, and it's gone longer, and I think some things were discussed here that should not have been discussed here, but that's my thoughts. Perhaps we need more school board meetings, or more people that are always at school board meetings, so that we can talk about some of these things. But things will get repaired and fixed one way or the other on all of these issues, but they will be done in a timely fashion, and when we have all the information, and when everybody, the personal attacks are really getting old. And I really think that we need to have better form at these meetings, and I would appreciate next Tuesday if perhaps we don't bring all of this same stuff up again, and maybe we need another board meeting or another workshop. I'm okay with that. But at any rate, we're coming to an end of this meeting. I see his name. I'm going to call on him next. If you just give me a minute to say something. I mean, I've been referee all afternoon. So at any rate, I think Dr. Bowden has something to add before we adjourn.
I just didn't want you to adjourn before we had the opportunity to recognize that one of our board members is celebrating a birthday today. So I just wanted to wish Ms. Ziegler a happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
What would you like us to
And
give?
how old are you today, 29?
29.
27.
You don't want to say what you want for your birthday?
Do you want us to sing happy birthday? Let's sing happy
No, please,
birthday.
God, no.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bridget Ziegler. Happy birthday to you. See, we can all come together for the good of the order. And our next public hearing to adopt the tentative millage and budget meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, July 30th, 2019 at 5:15. We're adjourned.
You want to